Hi, everybody. This is Warren Herman, and I'm going to speak a little bit more about this notion of the relationship between the idea of the logos in Christianity and the concept of interbeing in Buddhism. Now, the logos is introduced in the Krishna tradition. When St. John teaches us, he says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." This idea of the Word is the word logos. And logos implies a kind of logic. I believe that, as I said in a previous video, this could almost be interpreted as the computer code out of which the whole of reality is encoded. That might be a modern way of saying this word logos and giving us this understanding of this kind of logic of all things that is there. So it is in Stoicism, this idea of the logos was kind of this rational principle of the cosmos, the reason behind all things, the way things are. And it's kind of this weird understanding. I think that idea of the computer code kind of captures that weirdness of the way that everything is encoded. And so this idea of the logos is central to the understanding of the creation of things in Christianity. It says, through him all things were made. Through the logos all things were made. And the thing in Buddhism is that there's like a kind of a truncation of both contemplation and an understanding of creation. So rather than understanding that things are created by God, there is an understanding that everything dependently co-originates everything else. So, for example, when we look at a tree, we would not say that God created trees at any point. We would say that trees have arisen and are we don't say that God is sustaining the tree or that God created the tree. We say the tree came into being through various processes, through the interaction of many different factors, and is sustained through the interaction of many different factors. And these are all created causes, hundreds of them, all interacting. And that there really is no tree because the tree is just an interaction of hundreds of different causes. So it would be like you look at the tree and you say, okay, the tree is made up of the sunlight is in the tree, the dirt is in the tree is made up of all these non-tree elements. There is no self in the tree. Whereas in the Christian conception, there is this kind of the logos and even this terms of the logi, these like little reasons, these little things, that things are being like there's the big word that is being said and there's the little words. There is a way in which tree is being said by God through non-tree elements. And this brings us to this other understanding, this higher level of consciousness, so to speak, where we are able to perceive meaning. The problem is that in Buddhism, there is a concept that by approaching things in this kind of Zen manner, where we don't have a conceptual understanding of things, we were believed to be looking at things the way they are. Now, actually what's happening is that we're merely sinking below we're sinking out of our personal story rather than going into God's understanding of history. And that's the problem. We're going out of our story, but not into his story. So we think we're transcending something, but actually we're going below something. So that's the problem in the Buddhist meditation versus the Christian meditation. That's why the problem, that's the difference between reading a scripture and doing Lectio Divina and then following one's breath. That's the difference. You're going into one state of awareness or another. A state of awareness where you are moving out of the meanings of the logos and the logi and into one where you find it unintelligible. So there's this way in which we also lose out on the understanding of creation. We lose out on the understanding of providence. We lose out on the understanding that all things are being provided in God's love. And instead, we only are allowed to have this kind of understanding of that there are dependent co-origination of phenomena. We say, okay, if we examine the tree, we can't find the tree in the tree. So we say, okay, well, the highest we can get is what Thich Nhat Hanh does, where he talks about interbeing, where he talks about like a poetic way of looking at this, thinking about the beauty of how the water is in the tree and the sunlight is in the tree, but he's really talking about poetry, not potentially rhyming with tree, but he's talking about this poetic way of understanding the emptiness of all things. And it's kind of bringing a warmth into a cold world, but it's really an artificial warmth. Because really, at the end of the day, there is no tree, there is no sun. We could talk about the beauty of the sun, but there is no sun. We could talk about the beauty of the tree, there is no tree. We could talk about how the clouds are in our coffee, but there is no coffee, nor is there any cloud. the thing is that in the Christian conception of things, there is a way in which God is saying cloud, even if we can't find the cloud in the cloud. There's a way in which God is saying coffee, even if we can't find the coffee in the coffee. Because that's not where the coffee is. The coffee is in this dialogue that God is providing everything, and that everything is arising out of the love of God in his providence and has come out of the love of God through his creation. And what's amazing is that, the Buddhist scriptures take us into an understanding of a world that is has no beginning, where the beginning doesn't matter. It's really the moment is what matters. We kind of go into this place like in the Lotus Sutra where they talk about, emptiness is form and form is emptiness. And we go into this place where we really see through everything, and everything has no meaning, and then the liberation is that nothing has any meaning. We have no meaning, and we go into this non-conceptual consciousness. Now, this non-conceptual consciousness is completely different than the awareness of the logos, the logical consciousness, kind of this logos who is a person, of the personal knowledge of Christ and the whole world. Because the Buddhism is about going out of our story into no story, rather than coming out of our story into his story. That's the thing. So when we read the Christian scriptures, we enter into a type of consciousness where this type of consciousness, which dwells in the saints and dwells in the scriptures, and we see this in the prophets, and we see this in this symbol in prophecy. We see this kind of computer code of the universe being communicated to us, and we see the meanings of all things being communicated to us. And when we reflect on the scriptures, we meditate on the scriptures, we do Lectio Divina, rather than just going to the non-conceptual Zen consciousness. We go into the levels of reading, reflecting, praying, and then contemplating. We go into that consciousness of Christ. We get brought up into the true contemplation rather than a truncated contemplation of like the Zen. We go into these levels of the understanding of the scriptures, and the scriptures lead us into the consciousness, into communion with the God, the love of God, the God who made everything. And so when we read the scriptures, we understand the scriptures as this jumping off point. We then begin to understand the scriptures not as some arbitrary thing, but as an introduction, an instantiation of the computer code out of which everything was made. You see, the thing is that in the history of the world, every idea is believable except that of the Bible. You see, if I were to say, in a kind of New Age context, that everything has emanated out of the source, you would find that idea very palatable. You would find that idea very amenable. You'd say, okay, well, of course, there is an infinite source and all reality has emanated out of it. You wouldn't think anything of that. If I said God made everything through naturalistic processes, you wouldn't say anything odd about that. If we said something like, God is in everything, and so that we could say any type of thing. The thing that is found to be preposterous today, because I believe we don't understand what we're talking about, is the idea that God made the earth and made the world in 6 days, that God created a symbolic temple for himself in the world, that God began this process of the world around us as a kind of symbolic creation in some kind of way, that God actually went bam and actually made it the way that he said in Genesis. This is an unbelievable idea. But the thing is that I believe that it can be believed, and it is actually the case, but I believe it can be believed when we come to understand this idea of interbeing, and we come to understand that, what is being said is that in this place that is God, God from that place made everything. I mean, that the whole thing is so when in Buddhism we quiet our mind to be out of the story and experience the essence of our soul, nobody doubts that. Nobody looks around the world and practices Buddhist meditation and doubts interbeing. But the thing is, when we practice Lectio Divina and reflect on the scriptures, neither should we doubt the patterns that we find there. We should not doubt the typology, the deep structure. When we see the interbeing of the connection, when we see the interbeing of the cloud and the coffee, we should not discount the interbeing of, the wound on the side of Christ or the wound on the side of Adam. We shouldn't discount these hundreds of parallels, these hundreds of interlocking realities of these stories between each other. There are countless instances of this, and that this is the logos, this is the computer code out of which the universe has been made. And when we realize it in that way, that we are seeing the mind of the developer, that we could then look at this whole world as having been programmed exactly the way he has said so in the scriptures. we can begin to understand this truly and begin to realize and receive this, understanding it as a path toward contemplation, an understanding of consciousness, a revelation of God, the experience of God. We can transcend the modern resistance toward the seemingly scandalous way in which God made everything in 6 days, really made stuff the way he said it, created a symbolic reality, and then there was a transition to providence. We really can come to this understanding through this way of realizing that this is a way of conceptualizing the deepest truth of God's love, a way of making everything coherent in the light of a divine love that makes everything that exists a spoken word, that creates this kind of realism to reality that we cannot conceive of, that causes all thought to degenerate unless we have this dialogical reality of the Logos. We cannot have thought unless in this world that is created in this way, unless in this world that is sustained by God in this way, in this rational, logical, logos type world that is speaking in words to us. So I hope this is hard to communicate this, but I hope that this helps us get to this point where we can embrace the consciousness that we receive through the Bible, and embrace the consciousness of the saints, and embrace this consciousness that is given to us, that is that of the Logos, and that of the pattern that is given to us in Scripture, that enables us to transcend the modern prejudices of the mind, and receive that consciousness given to us in God's revelation. So I hope this is helpful in some way to you.